Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, John, this is Many a True Nerd. Welcome to the Many a True Nerd 2020 Awards, because 2020 is almost over and bloody hell does that deserve celebrating. So today we're going to be going over my top 12, yes 12, it's my list, I can do what I want, my top 12 games of 2020. But before we get into that, okay, we need to have a quick special mention here. So at the beginning of this year, I played A Short Hike. However, A Short Hike didn't come out in 2020 and thus isn't eligible for this list. So go back to the 2019 list and we are in spirit adding A Short Hike onto that, because if you didn't see the video and you've never played it, you definitely should. It was amazing, but that is now being retroactively added into the 2019 Many a True Nerd Game Awards, because had I played it in 2019, it not only would have been on the list, it probably would have been in, the top 5, maybe the top 3. It was amazing. Anyway, on to this year. Number 12, Doom Eternal. And Doom Eternal is a really good example of one thing I always say a good game should do, which is find one thing that you want to build your game around. It might be a mechanic, it might be a narrative thing, it might be an emotion that you want your audience to feel. And Doom Eternal is clearly built according to that sort of principle, except the thing at the very core of it in this case is pace and flow. Say in a normal shooter, you're running low on health or something, or you're running low on ammo, say. Well, typically, you'd fall back, you'd get into cover, you'd just wait for a bit until your shield or your health bar grows back. Doom Eternal tosses all of those conventions that so many games have just taken for granted over the last decade and tosses them in the flipping bin. If you want to get health in Doom Eternal, you have to go towards your enemies and literally punch it out of their faces. If you want ammo, you need to chainsaw it out of the body of your enemies. If you want armor, you've got to burn it out of your enemies, meaning if a fight's not going that well, you don't back off, you don't break flow, instead you need to charge into your enemies. So you are constantly going from one enemy to another. You very rarely hang back, you very rarely snipe, instead you are just rushing forward, battering, chainsawing, burning, bang bang, punch punch, and it is just relentless. And what I said the very first time I played it, and I stand by this, is if you're playing this game well, it almost feels like you're in a trance. It's like a ridiculously bloody ballet. I love the fact it's so fast. I love the fact that you've got little dashes that you always use to go forward. It makes you feel like a ridiculous, unstoppable, all-murdering badass, which you should do. It's a Doom game. You're literally the Doom guy. So the core mechanics, the game, the narrative, the story, all of it, it just fits together beautifully. It is a glorious bit of core game design that makes the whole game work. It is a flipping riot. Number 11, The Last of Us Part 2. Oh, this one caused me a fair whack of thinking, because The Last of Us Part 2 is not only the most mixed game on this list, it's possibly the most mixed game I have ever played in my entire life, which is when The Last of Us Part 2 works, it is sublime. When it is good, it is excellent. A particular highlight for me is the first flashback when Ellie and Joel go to the museum, and it's wonderful. It is just a happy, joyous story of two characters we know and love interacting with each other, voiced by two voice actors at the top of their flipping game. It is just absolutely delightful. And I also like where that scene takes place in the story, because The Last of Us Part 2 is a non-linear story, where you get a lot of tragedy up front, and then you get the happy flashbacks just kind of, interspersed through the story. So you get misery, and then you get a really happy flashback, then you get more misery, and it really accentuates and complements the bits around it. There's a lot there that I really like. Another bit I absolutely love is when Ellie decides to leave the farmhouse and continue her revenge and leaves her partner behind. That is heartbreaking. It is an absolutely heartbreaking scene. There are bits of The Last of Us Part 2 that are amazing. But, and yeah, you knew there was a but coming, there's a lot that's very messy in this game. There's a lot of really weird stuff here. Like, right at the start of the game, you've got this really big, interesting open area you can explore. There's secret areas, there's lots of stuff you can find, you can do it in any order of your choosing, and it's really odd, because they put that really early on, straight away after the tutorial. So, you'd think that'd be trying to introduce, the fact the game was going to be like that, but no, that's the only open area in the entire game. After that, an area like that never really shows up again. It's back to being very similar to how it was. And then you're tasked with going and tracking someone down. So you do go and track them down, but they're already dead, and all you find is a clue leading to the next person. So that feels kind of pointless, and then you think, oh, well, we're going to revisit that as Abby. So then we're going to recontextualise how that person died, but no, you never do. In fact, I'm not sure Abby ever knows about that person in the TV station, because she never goes there, so no one really knows who they are or why they died or anything. It's all very peculiar. The whole game feels a bit unnecessarily padded. The area where they introduce the dogs is brilliant and tense and interesting. The dogs are a great addition. And then that area goes on about 3 times longer than it needs to. Just more and more ruins and more dogs, and it doesn't need to be this long. And it's really weird, because The Last of Us Part 1 was a very tight focused game. It's very messy. Okay, it's ridiculously messy, but when it works, it's wonderful, and there is no game this entire year that Claire and I have discussed more, because after I played it, Claire was the one who did the editing. We had some very different takes on some of the story beats. We found it fascinating. We wanted to discuss it. It's perhaps the most interesting and discussion-worthy game I've played all year, but it's also a bit of a mess. So it ends up on this list, and it does do a lot of stuff right. The core gameplay is solid. The stealth and action works really well. It is gorgeous and a technical marvel, even on the base PS4, but there's just too much that's not quite right with it, so it stays here at number 11. Number 10, Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. Now, when a game tells you, oh, you can go anywhere and do anything, 99% of the time, that game is lying to you. What it actually means is, you need to be a wandering adventurer and or mercenary, and occasionally, for a few minutes at a time, you can do some little sub-quests or something, but your core occupation will always be travelling adventurer and or mercenary. So I was delighted when I played Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord, tried to be a merchant, and found actually it works really damn well. I had a whale of a time just wandering around, figuring out what shops were there, looking at the dynamic economies, buying stuff up cheap, going up north, buying, huge amounts of cheap wood, cheap furs, shipping them south where there were no forests, and just flogging them giant piles of wood, trading it for luxury goods, selling them to the local rich folks. Oh, it was a wonderful time. I have spent so many hours in Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord just wandering around being a merchant, and what I love is the world feels alive. It doesn't feel like you are the preordained hero, and if you're not doing anything, nothing's happening. One of my best memories of the entire game is I basically spent every penny I had on some massively reduced goods, knowing I could flog them at a ridiculous profit just around the corner. But by the time I actually made it to my destination, almost bankrupt, unable to afford my own team that was keeping me safe from bandits and whatnot, the city I was planning to sell them at was under siege. I needed to find anybody who would take any part of my cargo off me just to actually pay my own team. It was wonderful. And it wasn't planned, it wasn't part of a story, this wasn't, a fixed event. This was just something that emerged dynamically out of a world that keeps moving even if you're not, where it feels like you are a tiny part of a massive, intricate machine. So many games claim that that's what they're doing, but Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord, I really feel like it is. I had a wonderful time with it, and as it evolves, as it picks up, patches, expansions, DLCs, more and more updates, I will be getting back into it because there's a lot I love there. Number 9, Hard Space Shipbreaker. Hard Space Shipbreaker is basically a puzzle game. Now, it doesn't look like it, but it basically is. You are going around with a series of cutting and dragging implements, and you are chopping up a ship into parts. But the ships are basically giant puzzle boxes where you are solving the puzzle of, within a limited time span, what is the most efficient way you can take apart and sell this ship. and sometimes with a big ship, that's going to take the form of an entire in-game day just being dedicated to finding a way to very gently remove extremely large, valuable, delicate, and explosive components. Sometimes that's going to involve a mid-sized ship where you're simply cutting it down to the absolute bones, and there's so much satisfaction for taking a small to medium-sized ship and at the end of the shift seeing there's nothing there. You have stripped it down to its absolute bare bones. Every single square inch of valuable material has been taken off and shoved in the relevant skip, and you have got a really good paid out of it. It's so damn satisfying. I assume this is how chefs feel when they do a really good job butchering a carcass. Number 8, Half-Life Alyx. Now, I've said previously, many times, that the best way to make a VR game is to keep it fairly simple. Games like Beat Saber, Super Hot VR, Job Simulator, they take a very simple concept. They're built in very small spaces. And generally, so far, that's been the key to making a good VR game. Because when people try and take, existing concepts for what a video game should be and just retroactively shoehorn all of those into VR, like say Fallout 4 VR, it can be very visually impressive, but it just doesn't work because it just doesn't suit the medium. Half-Life Alyx is, I think, the first and maybe only example of a big, full AAA style game actually working in VR. And it's because they didn't start with any assumptions they were determined to make in VR. It is built from the ground up to be a VR game, and I don't think it would really work outside of VR because that's the format it's been designed for. The Gravity Glove is a work of absolute genius. It feels amazing to use in VR. The environments and the enemies are just wonderful, and by wonderful, I mean terrifying. It's not really a horror game, but bloody hell, being in the dark, in the sewers, with a flashlight, when there are monsters coming at you, it's an absolute nightmare, but it's a wonderful experience too. It's one of my favourite VR games of all time, and honestly, I did not think this was going to be good, because I would have sworn blind to you before this year, the only way to make a really solid, amazing VR game was to keep it small, keep it simple, like all my favourite VR games up to this point have done. Half-Life Alyx proves me wrong, and I'm glad it did. Number 7, Bugsnax. Now, Bugsnax is not really what I was expecting, but it is what I was hoping it was, which is, from the very early trailers of Bugsnax, there was something just slightly wrong with it. It looked like a cute, fun puzzle game that was suitable for all ages, but there was just something a tiny bit off about the trailers. Something that made it seem a bit dark. And in the end, I'm so glad to see that's exactly what the end game is. Because yes, there is a nice, simple, fun, light, fluffy puzzle game in there. But it's also sitting alongside a narrative that is surprisingly dark, surprisingly subversive, and sometimes very darkly comic, where one moment you're enjoying just some silly food and bug puns, and the next moment you're watching a flashback to a character who's having a heartbreaking emotional breakdown because she can't deal with the pressure being unfairly put on her by other villagers during an emergency crisis situation. And it just comes to you completely unexpectedly. You don't know when the game's going to be light and fluffy. You don't know when it's going to go ludicrously dark. You don't know when it's going to go full-on dark comedy. You don't know which way the game is going to go. And I love the fact the whole thing's got this weird, dark, subversive undercurrent to it. It's fascinating, and it's unique. I cannot think of a game that tries to balance those three elements, those three tones. It's just fascinating, and so worth a look. Number 6, and this is, I believe, a first for the Many a True Nerd Awards, I am giving a joint award to Fall Guys and Fogs, because I couldn't figure out which of these two I liked more. And I realised I love them for pretty much exactly the same reason. So, screw it, we're having both of them sharing the number 6 slot this year. Because they are basically very, very similar indeed. Fall Guys is a marvel because it's a Battle Royale game that I've really got into, and I very rarely get into Battle Royale games at all, and it completely sidesteps the issue that's fundamental to the format, which is if you've got a certain number of people, 60, 100, whatever, who are all going into a competition and only one can win, therefore, simply by law of averages, you're going to spend the vast majority of your time losing. How do you avoid a game where you're constantly losing being frustrating? Fall Guys gets around it through the genius structure of being a game show with multiple rounds, where it's pretty easy for anybody, at least, on a semi-regular basis, to get past at least the first round, even if you're very young or not very familiar with video games at all. And the whole game is just so charming and chaotic and anarchic. I don't care if I lose, because I have a whale of a time while I'm losing. I've literally won one game in my entire Fall Guys career, and that doesn't bother me in the slightest. I'm happy to keep going back to it, because it's just a series of blasts of short, brilliant, fun games, where you just spend a minute playing a game, and then you move straight on to the next one. And Folks conceptually is very similar. Okay, it's not a battle royale, it's much more about single player or couch co-op, but it's basically the same thing. You spend 30 seconds playing a really fun little mini-game, then you're straight on to the next. It is just a series of fun, chaotic experiences where you just play something fun, you do something else fun, you do something else fun, then the game gives you a star because you've done well, and you're shuffled off into the next level. It's just a joy. Both of them are just pure joys. I love them for the same reason, so that's why they're sharing their slots. Number 5, Yes Your Grace. Now, Yes Your Grace is a game I admire, because it is almost certainly the most simple game on this list. Basically, it's a series of very simple, basically static backgrounds, some very simple characters who just sort of, bob up and down slightly in front of them, and text. And yet it tells a wonderful, compelling story that I was so bloody invested in. I wanted to get the best possible ending I could, despite the fact that it was conceptually and graphically so simple. I just have a huge amount of admiration for the craft. The world building and the writing were just so darn good. I was drawn into this world and I wanted to see what happens next. I just have a huge admiration for a game that takes so little and got so much out of it. It's a marvel. It's an absolute flipping marvel. A surprisingly compelling game, well worth a look-see if you never caught it at the time. Number 4, Ghost of Tsushima. Now, Ghost of Tsushima is, to my mind, a good example of a game that is functionally perfect. It's pretty much the best version of itself that it can be. Everything about it works wonderfully. Now, I played it on the original base PS4, and it runs like a dream. Absolute technical marvel. Score, amazing. Audio design in general, great. Narrative, fantastic. Voice acting, excellent. Gameplay, really, really damn solid. Works well as a combat game, works well as a stealth game, and the world is just a big, interesting joy to navigate. Now, you're probably hearing all that and thinking, John, how can that game possibly be number 4? For the simple reason that Ghost of Tsushima, to my mind, loses a few points for not being that original. It's incredible, but just about everything in it you probably will have seen in a lot of other games, potentially games from quite a few years ago. Now, that's not a bad thing. In fact, if anything, it's kind of embarrassing to Ubisoft in particular, because Ghost of Tsushima takes various elements from various Ubisoft games and combines them into a game that is, as far as I'm concerned, superior to literally any Ubisoft game I've ever played. They've just taken some of those core ingredients, core ideas, and optimized them, perfected them. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience, completely 100% worth a look-see, but I had to dock, just a handful of points for the fact that, plenty of the core ideas, light attack, heavy attack, dodge, parry, etc., you have seen these before. You're not going to have your mind blown away by the ideas, but the execution, that's where the joy is. Number 3, Not For Broadcast. Oh, I love Not For Broadcast, and I'll admit, I'm biased, because this is basically a game about putting together a current affairs news show where the tone is surreal and dark comedy that reminds me a lot of the work of Chris Morris, in particular The Day-to-Day and Brass Eye. And I love Chris Morris and The Day-to-Day and Brass Eye. So a game that basically lets me relive some of those glory days together with, putting together my own version of it, well, that was always going to be an easy win for me. But I just love how it's such an interesting, fresh idea. I can't remember another game quite like this one. And to be honest, they just said to me, hey, here's a flipping editing suite in a television studio. I'd have been sold and this would probably have been on this list regardless. But they put so much bloody effort into the footage that you're actually cutting together. And they didn't really need to, because the challenge is to take that footage and try and make it into something that looks good at the end. But they put a huge amount of effort into getting good actors, brilliant scripts, well delivered. It's a joy. And again, this is a very subjective thing. This is probably the single most subjective one on the list for me. And they really do go the extra mile. They've added all these little extra bonus modes in, where you can kind of replay the individual episodes, but under different rule sets. It's just a joy. It's a wonderful, wonderful game. Completely unique, absolutely hilarious. And I love the fact, by the way, I've got 2 different comedy-focused games on this list this year. We don't get many comedy games, but with the slightly subversive dark humour of Bugsnax and the weird surrealism of Not For Broadcast, oh, I'm so glad we got both of them this year. That's been an absolute joy. Please check this out, because they are releasing this a bit at a time through updates, so jump on now. There's still plenty of new stuff to come, so worth a look-see. Number 2, Crusader Kings 3. Now, I suspect a large number of people thought this was going to be my game of the year, and I thought that for a long time too, but yeah, we'll get to what displaced it in just a second. But even so, Crusader Kings 3, I think, is a marvel, because you've got to factor in, this is the sequel to Crusader Kings 2. Crusader Kings 2 is loved by a lot of people, widely regarded by people who are into that sort of thing as an absolute classic. But more than that, Crusader Kings 2 had behind it almost a decade of optimization, expansions, DLC, various packs and bits and pieces. Crusader Kings 2 had received a ludicrous amount of love and was ludicrously successful, and by the end of its lifetime was stuffed with so much content that going into Crusader Kings 3, I was worried that Crusader Kings 3 was going to feel a bit bare bones next to a completely fully updated Crusader Kings 2. And I'm so glad that by some miracle, they've managed to avoid that. Crusader Kings 3 feels meaty and proper and really, really stuffed full of good stuff already. And that's insane. That is absolutely insane, because it was going up against a game with 8 years worth of, DLC expansions and associated free updates. And even then, Crusader Kings 3 just nails some stuff. I do in particular like the new focus system, which, means different rulers have access to a whole different series of powers that others would not, and interactions and whatnot. That's great. That's amazing. It really makes some rulers feel distinct from others. And, during my recent playthrough, I did make an effort to have some diplomatic rulers, some martial rulers, some stewardship rulers, intrigue rulers, learning rulers, and they did feel incredibly distinct. And when it's a game all about characters and role-playing, that's so useful. It's really, really nice. Now, absolutely, there's stuff missing. I miss the treasury, in particular. Education feels a bit bare bones. Great Holy Wars need to be fleshed out significantly, though they have definitely been improved as of 1.2. There's a bunch of stuff I would like to see added in, but it's just a miracle and a huge relief to me that I'm having a whale of a time with Crusader Kings 3 after spending hundreds of hours with Crusader Kings 2 and a ridiculous amount of DLC. Crusader Kings 3 doesn't feel bare bones to me at all. There's stuff I'd like to add, but it already feels like a good, solid, meaty game, and by all accounts, it's been well received by the community. And just consider, there's maybe 8 years of expansions and updates yet to come. Just imagine all the exciting stuff that's yet to appear. It's wonderful. I'm looking forward to it so damn much. But even in its launch state, it is a gem. And I have adored it every single moment that I've put my series together. But, it was in the end forced into the number 2 position because number 1, the Miniatruna Game of the Year is, again, I think a few people might have predicted this, Hades. And I was late to the Hades train. I will fully admit, I was late on this one, but yeah, once I got into it, oh my. Oh, flipping my. It is wonderful. It is compelling. In fact, it's so compelling, it's probably addictive, and this is probably a bit concerning. But the thing is, you've got to remember, I play a lot of video games. So it takes a very special video game indeed for me to, be constantly going back to one in my own time. There's a very elite little club of games that I play in my own time, like some of the classic Total War games, like Rome 1, Medieval 2, Civ 6 is another. I go back to Civ 6 on a semi-regular basis. Slay the Spire and FTL, those are good roguelikes, but Hades has now joined their club. I have played a lot of Hades In fact, yes, despite being so late to actually getting it and not picking it up until fairly late in the year, it's already my 17th most played game on Steam of all time, so that might give you an idea for what we're dealing with here. And Hades just gets everything right. The aesthetic is gorgeous. Audio design and voice acting is amazing. The narrative is so elegantly and seamlessly woven in to the core mechanics. It's great. And if you've ever played it, you don't need me to explain why, because I've never actually seen anybody say they don't like Hades after playing it. It just seems to hook people in. It is just an elegant piece of genius where everything, story and mechanics, fit together beautifully. It is a work of art. I absolutely adore it, and I honestly can't see anybody not enjoying it, because even if you're not familiar with that style of game, there are tools to help you out with that. There is God mode, if you want to turn that on, where every time you die, you get stronger and stronger, and as it's a rogue legacy game, you get progressively stronger over time anyway. The Pact of Punishment, meanwhile, is a brilliant system to avoid that power creep making the late game too easy. If you put too much time into it, it is just an elegant work of art. I absolutely adore it. It's just flipping wonderful. And I really hope they're planning, expansions or a sequel or something, because I want more in this universe, damn it. Give me more damn Hades. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that is your lot. That there is the 2020 Miniatruna Game Awards. Congratulations to Hades, and it's been a good year for gaming anyway. Not so much in real life. But maybe 2021 will be better in real life and in gaming too, because I will say, we've got Hitman 3. That could be a Game of the Year contender for 2021. That's coming really, really bloody early on in the year. So, okay, could be stuff to watch right from the flipping beginning. I hope you've had a lovely year on the channel, joining me on all our adventures, and I hope you're looking forward to 2021 as well. But in the meantime, I've been John, this has been Many a True Nerd, and this has been the Many a True Nerd 2020 Awards. Thank you very much, and goodbye.